Okay, buckle up, people, because we've got a couple weeks or modules to cover the most challenging learning material that you're going to encounter in this class. It's a deeper look at some major theoretical and conceptual notions that have been offered by some of the most prominent voices in media studies. We're first going to start with some fundamental ideas by a few of the legends of sociology, which will help us to then consider some other basic ideas by some cultural and media theorists that have shaped the discipline. And like last time and going forward, I'm going to be reading off my awkward script that I've pre-written to make this go a little easier. You'll notice I'm wearing my reading glasses so I can do that, and because I'm old. So let's get going. Because there is a substantial amount of reading tied to this, I've broken the theory in this course into two sections and two video lectures. The first, this one, classical sociological theories, and next we'll do social constructionism and cultural and media theory, some names associated with that. With the driving theoretical orientation in this class being social constructionism as a segue between the two to help you digest it all better. We'll get to that. And after all these theories and related content, we'll be ready for our first exam before getting into the weeds on the actual media content that we'll be engaged in for the remainder of this course. So just a heads up, if you can handle this fairly dense and complex material and perform well on the related assignments, an exam, an activity journal, and a discussion or two, you'll find that the rest of the class gets easier and more interesting since you'll have a theoretical framework to make sense of the actual content found in the mass media in all its ubiquitous glory. So I'm telling you straight up, this is the hardest material to grasp in this course, and you won't do well on the upcoming exam if you just rely on this video lecture without actually reading the material, okay? And there's a ton of reading and other learning material to get through, but after this, you'll find the rest of the material to be more concrete and I think easier to contemplate, and there'll be less of it actually after we get through this section. So just before we get going, I just wanted to give you another tip for studying and preparing for this class to do well in the course. Read the related articles on these theories and theorists first, if you can, before you watch these lectures. These videos will be more useful for you if you've had read the material first, because these videos are only intended to add extra insight and context to these often esoteric and complex ideas, not to fully explain them. So if you have read about the if you have read about the theories and theorists first, you will have the right questions or clarifications in mind as you watch the videos, so you'll be more likely to understand my lectures. Of course, you can do it backwards. Watch the video lectures first, and you'll probably be fine. But just don't watch these expecting to have a complete understanding of these ideas. That's ultimately on you to engage all the material if you want to do well in the course, okay? So let's get going. In this first part on theory, I'm going to make a few clarifying remarks about four of the classical sociologists. That's Marx, Durkheim, Weber, and Mead. Notice Weber is pronounced Weber and not Weber like it looks in print, W-E-B-E-R, but it's pronounced Weber. He's German, so just go with it. These guys who never actually talked much about media or mass media, but who had some fundamental observations about social institutions and their effects on culture, cultural production of ideas, and on dynamic changes within these institutions, some of which can be applied to our study of the media. Let's start with our good friend Karl Marx, whose name you may recognize from other courses. He's the conflict sociologist who spent most of his career debating the pros and cons of capitalism, and he was quite wrongly considered the father of communism or socialism. And by the way, before we get into this, I have to point out that Marx's reputation as a radical communist and hater of American capitalism should not escape our scrutiny here, since this idea is a cultural and media production in and of itself, painting a picture of this guy, Marx, as some kind of antichrist of capitalism, which he was not, but used by some in the media to delegitimize his important ideas in works like Das Kapital and the Communist Manifesto, and portray him as an antagonist of America and our freedoms or whatever. So try to keep your own personal biases at bay if they exist as we go through this guy's ideas, Marx or anyone else, and just try to understand these ideas without any preconceived notions of them or of theory in general for that matter. Understand that we are using the term theory a bit loosely here too, as some of these things are just refined ideas and not fully testable or quantifiable or data-based necessarily. But also understand that they are more than probably what your idea of theory is, the way we sort of normally use it. Your idea, for example, that your neighbor is a secret Klansman or that all Mexicans are lazy. These might be your opinions, but they should not be considered a theory without observable indicators that confirm these opinions, reaffirmed by peer-reviewed research and scholarship over many years, and with some consensus among experts in the field, which is what we're dealing with here with these theories. So with Marx and the rest of these scholars, in these short video lectures, I will just highlight and add to the course material rather than try to summarize every major idea, and I'll be bouncing back and forth between this slide and later slides in the Ryan and Wentworth article that's been assigned for this section that's below these slides right here, to make the connection between their ideas with respect to media studies. Notice also that the hyperlinks tied to the theorists' names take you to a Wikipedia website where you can glean further insight into each of them if you're so inclined. And Marx, like these other old white guys, has a lot to say about society, but essentially with the economic structure of society as his starting point, he's arguing that we can understand social institutions like the media as a cultural production that, in America anyway, is organized to sustain power and privilege by the economic elites of society over the working masses and to control their workers both physically through, for example, law enforcement or laws, and psychologically through ideological control by the ruling elite, and the media plays a role in that. We'll get to that. This ideological control can be seen in the mass media by distracting the public with entertainment or by misleading narratives in news media, for example. But also, Marx points out that how media operates in a society is based in class distinctions and class identity to conform to the ideologies and practices of those in power and to, quote unquote, maintain the status quo. That's a conflict term. On a more positive note, Marx believed that the media, if given freedom of expression, could be a solution to balance power in societies by acting as an agent of transparency, giving voice to the oppressed masses, and by calling out social injustices so that inequality could be exposed and rectified. So Marx wouldn't claim to be a Marxist or sociologist today, I don't think. But he is attributed with being a founder of what we call conflict theory, which is a theoretical paradigm in sociology that focuses on the power struggle between the ruling class and the rest of us. But understand that the conflict he talks about is really a conflict of interest between the ruling class and those they oppress, and not physical conflict or violence per se. If you haven't already read the article, pause this video and read the sections I've quite literally pointed out for marks below. For Durkheim, moving to Durkheim now, was often considered a functionalist, which is another competing theoretical orientation or paradigm in sociology, concerned with maintaining structure and order in society. His take on society was that symbols, rituals, and ceremonies used by a culture function to stabilize social norms by gaining consensus among its citizenry through shared beliefs that are strengthened by the bonds created through these symbols and rituals. Conversely, when societies are less cohesive, they experience what he called anomie, defined as a state of normlessness or chaos, if you will, cultural chaos. And thus, they become destabilized, so is seen as problematic. Without social institutions working in harmony, anomie is allowed in, and the public, not having a clear sense of social norms, values, or beliefs, can fall into disarray due to these chronically anomic conditions. Again, if you haven't already read the article, pause this video and read the sections I've pointed out for Durkheim below in a few slides below this. Now for Weber, and again it's pronounced Weber, but it looks like Weber. That's a major faux pas in sociology, so don't make it. It's Weber, it's German. For Weber, who I would consider to be an early symbolic interactionist, which is yet another sociological paradigm or theoretical orientation concerned with the production of meanings in society that ultimately create culture. What is key here for Weber is the successful creation of ideas that come to be seen as legitimate in society. That is, they become unquestioned as part of the collective values in any given society. As an example of this, he talks about the Protestant work ethic. In fact, he wrote, I think, at least one book about, I know he wrote at least one, but maybe more books and articles about the Protestant work ethic. When he talks about it, he talked a lot about the legitimization of religion in this context too. He talks about it as an idea that has become valued and internalized in our culture. Work hard and good things will happen. God says you should work hard. This is a good example of a taken for granted social norm that is adopted without question as an example of this. Again, as you read it, the full article on this, think about that as just a sort of a general orientation. So you might want to, again, pause this video if you haven't already watched it or read it, read it, and we'll move on to the fourth guy, which is George Herbert Mead, one of my favorites. For Mead, who refined ideas associated with what we now call symbolic interactionism. This is that third theoretical paradigm, three basic ones in the sociological discipline, I would say, concerned with how culture is produced through individual or small group interactions in a dynamic way where shared meanings are established and used to shape identities. All social structure and institutions, including the media as a social institution, are formed through these interpersonal interactions where people project their ideas onto others and are simultaneously shaped by others, forming shared meanings across the culture, but also forming individual identities tied to those shared meanings. And this is sometimes called a micro-theoretical orientation because it deals with individuals and small groups. So for instance, if you compare how the media portrayed female celebrities in the past, like Marilyn Monroe, as an icon or representation of beauty, with today's imagery of beauty, if you compare it with today's imagery of beautiful women today who are shown to be mostly white and very, very thin, almost anorexic. You can see how notions of beauty are shaped by the culture and how it affects your sense of self and identity too. I mean, just think about what you consider to be a fat or unattractive woman today, and how likely you'd be willing to date that fatty Marilyn. You've seen images of her. She wouldn't pass muster in today's culture, as an example of that, of sort of shared meanings. This all happens either verbally, let me try that again. Try it again. This all happens as we interact in our daily lives through the ideas and meanings we convey every time we communicate, either verbally or symbolically, through gestures, words, or images. This phenomenon of symbolic communication and of identity formation was the reason he distinguishes between the I and the me as two levels of identity formation, where the I represents your sense of your true self and the me represents your social self, the image of yourself that you want to project onto others. Think about your Facebook or Instagram account and what you choose to post there. We are always concerned with how we think other people think of us as, right? But that isn't the same as how we feel about ourselves, and that's what differentiates Mead's idea about distinguishing between the I and the me. If you haven't already read this article, again, now's a good time to pause this video and read the sections I pointed out. Also, notice that when talking about the production of culture, Mead emphasizes the individual level phenomenon, where Durkheim and Marx emphasize the institutional level, focusing on the structure of society and producing culture, which is sometimes called a macro level theory or perspective. Okay, the second part of the theory, I'm going to end this first part on theory and start the next section, the next video, looks at social constructionism first, and then we look at four different cultural and media theorists who have some interesting ideas to add to our examination of pop culture and the media. As I mentioned in the last lecture, you'd be wise to have already read the articles related to these theories and theorists, so you have an idea of what they are saying. And then my comments are offered for further insight and clarification. You shouldn't try to get by with these theories with just my video lectures. You'll need to wrestle with the actual readings to fully get it. So I'll see you in part 2 of these theory lectures.